very different indeed. Join me after the headlines.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Donald Trump has promised a new dawn for the Middle East as he addressed the Israeli parliament. The US president and other world leaders have now formally signed the Gaza peace plan. It has seen all 20 of the remaining surviving hostages return to their families and around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners released. Israeli and American flags are flying in Tel Aviv's Hostages Square, where thousands have gathered.
This is the world. From here on, we can start maybe healing.
We're really all connected. It's like a part of me came home.
It's just a part of another war that is here between Israelis and Palestinians, and the fight is not over.
A woman has been detained under the Mental Health Act following the deaths of 2 children in Stamford. They were found in a house on Sunday. The government says it's extremely disappointed by the outcome of a collapsed China spying trial. Security Minister Dan Jarvis has been updating Parliament following accusations it failed to produce crucial evidence. And Vodafone says it's working to fix a major issue affecting its internet services. Thousands of customers reporting problems with broadband, 4G and 5G. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 15 points at 94.42. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.15. LBC weather, some clear spells in the north and far west tonight, staying largely cloudy for the south and far north, a low of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. This is the day that many of us thought would never happen.
This is not only the end of a war, this is the end of the age of terror and death and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God.
Families reunited in Israel and Gaza alike. Jubilant celebrations in Tel Aviv and a lengthy address from President Trump to the Israeli parliament on his victory lap of the Middle East. Now, whatever you think of him, the man deserves his moment. You may think he's the Messiah, or you may think he's just, well, very naughty. But Donald Trump has achieved something nobody had before. We all know of the obstacles ahead. Hamas armed again, fanning out across Gaza, insisting they won't go away and searching now for traitors. Then there are the Israeli hardliners who really don't want any kind of peace at all. Then there's the cost of rebuilding an apocalyptic landscape. But tonight, when all of the 20 still living Israeli hostages and around 1,900 Palestinian prisoners have been released, after a day when Benjamin Netanyahu says that he is committed to this peace, it would be a bit small, a bit mean-minded to scrabble around searching for the howevers, the on the other hands, the yes buts. No, this is a really good day, perhaps genuinely a historic one. If it was possible to end that grim war in Northern Ireland, to end the slaughter in the Balkans, it's possible as well to end this unspeakable conflict. Let's start tonight in Israel with Gili Roman, whose extraordinarily brave sister Yarden was captured by Hamas after managing to save her own daughter, but who is now again a free woman. When we spoke earlier, he was wearing his yellow ribbon badge and his Bring Them Home t-shirt. So, how did he feel?
I'm so relieved. I think that this is a day that shows that being hopeful can be accommodated with the right outcomes. We fought for this day for very long here in Israel, also around the world, to bring back our loved ones. I cannot even believe I'm saying there are no hostages, living hostages in Gaza. It's like, it seems like something that is just part of our lives, part of like the way through of our air to our lungs that was interrupting our breath. And for us specifically as a family that got one member back, my sister, but we lost her sister-in-law Carmel that was murdered in Gaza a year ago. We understand very vividly the difference between life and death and how fragile it can be. So I'm so relieved for these families, and the atmosphere in the square today was phenomenal.
Well, I was going to ask about that, because in that square you've had weeks and months of protests and agony and frustration and pain, really. So what was the atmosphere when the news finally filters through to the square itself that all the hostages are free?
Yeah, so this square was a place that every time that you came, I came sometimes every day, sometimes every week. It's like the whole burden, the heaviness of the world was on your shoulder. But today, it was a celebration of lightness and happiness. Since last night, circles of songs, dancing, chatting. Today, people were waving to the sky to the helicopters, crying with the pictures of the hostages. And you can just see very vividly how people were happy that the war is ending. I think that there were many speculations and accusations against Israel, the Israeli population about this war, and that could remind you that we didn't want this war, didn't open this war, we didn't want this war to prolong. We wanted two things. We wanted the hostages back, we wanted Hamas off power, and the nightmare to end. And you could see how every sector of the Israeli society were just rejoiced, happy that it's behind us and we can move forward.
Well, this is a huge news story, of course, all around the world, but it's also a story about individuals and personal stories. Tell us a little bit about your sister, who I think was grabbed by Hamas because she was very, very bravely and courageously saving her daughter, who then grew up with you.
Yeah, so my sister was 54 days in captivity. She was taken from Kibbutz Ferry with her husband and her baby. That back then my niece was 3 years old, and they managed to run just a few meters before crossing the border to Gaza with the terrorists. Run away with Gef and my niece in my sister's arms. At a certain point, while the terrorists were shooting at them and chasing them, they were trying to save their lives under fire. Yarden just had to decide to give up her daughter, hand it over to her father and tell him to run. And he hid and he saved the both of them. But my sister stayed behind and she was recaptured. We were searching for her on the battlefield for the whole first week of the war until we understood that she's a hostage. And my family, mostly my little brother, took care along with her father, took care of my niece while we were advocating for Yarden released around the world. And she came back. And that is really something very, very particular. So I can feel in my body the sense of what these families are feeling today.
So what about her? She must feel huge emotions as well on a day like this, seeing all the other hostages coming out after so long.
Yeah, I don't know how much she saw. I'm going to meet her soon. It's obviously very emotional and triggering, but for her, it's a huge relief. It's a huge relief. I think that this point, you need to understand, like, these people were not in good, safe hands for 2 years. So, and every single minute, they're in the brink between life and death. So, but there is this moment when they're in the IDF hands, when they're in Israeli hands, that everything changes. So I think that she understands them, like, more than any of us, this particular moment that happened today twice, like with the 7th in the first round and the 13th with the second round. We just waited for this moment that we will say they are in Israeli hands, then they're in Israel. Those are like life-changing moments, and she knows them better than anyone. So I think that in those moments I was communicating with her. It was very, very meaningful.
Gili, this, as we've said, it's a day of hope and optimism and life. Nonetheless, there were many, many hostages who didn't make it back, and there are still many families wondering where the remains of their relatives actually are. Your reflections on all those families for whom today is at least bittersweet.
Yeah, so first of all, let's remember that Hamas is obligated by the agreement to bring all of the body back. Today, they're already breaking this agreement by saying that they're going to find only 4. We need all of them back. I think that closing the circle is very important. As I said, unfortunately, my family also endured the murder of our family relative Carmel, but it was excruciating. But it was very meaningful that we were able to close this circle. So I think that it will be like this for all the 28 families. Israelis are very used to bittersweet experiences. So I think that we know today was like a very, very sweet day and morning. Now it's going to be a bitter evening, and maybe a few more days, maybe even more. We know how to agonizing our load side with our happiness, but I can say this is something that was very, very hard to do in the last 2 years. The last 2 years was mostly heavy suffering and pain, and mostly worry. Now I think it's a little bit different, and I think we are marking a path that we can find a place even for our sorry, even for our grief. That was a very, very long day since October 7th, and now we can move to the next day.
And Gili, I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump is a divisive figure around the world. How do you feel about him today, and how do you think he stands as a result of what's happened today?
Yeah, I think that absolutely President Trump should get the main credit and the glory. I really want to be in a world that we glorify people who end wars. Not people who begin wars, like happened on October 7th, that so many of people in the world, even today, glorifying Hamas and their actions. I want to see the credit and the honor being given to people who made the effort to end wars, and I think he did it. I think it was like a very hard job. I think also like the changes of consumption, that we are stopping with these partial deals, we are ending it, pushing all the sides, including our government, that we pushed them for over a year to say to the world, this is exactly how we want things to end, put an agreement on the table and let Hamas say yes or no. Of course, we also try to push Hamas, who very, very cruelly and viciously prioritize their own organization on top of their own citizens. They could end this on October 8th. Of course, they could avoid from opening this war, but they could avoid any day since October 8th. They could release the hostages, give up their arms, and we would be in the day that we are today. I think he did incredible efforts with all the partnership. What is going on right now in Sharm el-Sheikh, it's really a beacon of light. Who could imagine that we're going to start talking about the future and peace? And he put all of his political capital, which is a lot, on this. So I'm happy.
Well, it is an extraordinary day. Gili, thank you very, very much for spending time talking to LBC on this remarkable and historic night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nan.
But keeping up the momentum for peace means renewed and extraordinary efforts on all sides, with everybody rushing to claim credit. To get some perspective on the politics next, let's hear from Daniel Shapiro, the US ambassador to Israel during the Obama years. He may be on the other side of the spectrum to President Trump, but how much credit should we be giving him?
I think we should give President Trump credit for doing what needed to be done to bring this war to an end and to bring these hostages home. It was a more recent decision by him to use the leverage he had or has with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then also to get Arab states to use the leverage they have, Arab states and Turkey, with Hamas, to convince them to do the things necessary to reach this deal. For the first several months of his presidency, he really chose a different path. He made his own proposals and did things to back Israeli actions that were going to add time to the war and add time to the hostages' captivity. But after the Israeli strike against Hamas leaders in Doha, Qatar in early September, he changed course and he decided it was time to bring the war to an end, to use the leverage he has, and to get Arab states and Turkey to use the leverage they have. So then it happened very quickly. And so that's a very important and impressive achievement for ending the war. But of course, there's a lot of work ahead. His 20-point plan has really only gotten through the first 4 or 5 points. Those are the phase one ceasefire elements. Now comes the hard work that he'll tackle at this summit in Egypt on reconstructing Gaza, disarming Hamas, and trying to find a political path forward for Israelis and Palestinians.
Those things may be very hard. A lot of us here in the UK remember the same phase of the Northern Ireland peace process. And of course, Jonathan Powell was involved then and is involved here. There's been a big controversy in the UK as to whether Britain's decision alongside France to recognise the state of Palestine has made this peace deal harder or easier, or has it any effect at all? What is your perspective?
I don't think the recognition of a state of Palestine by the UK, Canada, France, Australia was helpful when those decisions were made. It doesn't change anything on the ground and really doesn't do anything to advance toward the creation of a Palestinian state, which is only going to come about through negotiations. It's only going to come about once the Israeli public's very legitimate security concerns are addressed. And it looks like, or could be seen as, and certainly when it happened, was seen as a reward to Hamas and maybe the result of the October 7th attacks. So President Trump was right to say that issue should be dealt with later. It is addressed in his 20-point plan that if the Palestinian Authority is conducting the reforms it needs to, and if Gaza is being reconstructed peacefully with Hamas out of power and disarmed, then there's something to talk about regarding a credible pathway.
Mike Huckabee said that Britain was delusional to say that we had been important in making this peace deal happen. Do you agree with that?
I don't know all of the aspects of the British diplomacy that might have been contributing to some of the discussions behind the scenes. So I don't want to ascribe to that particular description. I saw that today Steve Witkoff tweeted something very complimentary about the UK's role and Jonathan Powell in particular. So there may be aspects of the UK diplomacy that are less visible to the public. And so obviously we always work better, the United States and the UK, when we're coordinated. And hopefully there was some of that in this case.
You will have heard President Trump somewhat abusing Presidents Obama and Biden in the Knesset and being warmly applauded for doing so. As somebody who served President Obama, how did that feel?
Well, President Trump spoke for about an hour, and there were some coherent themes embedded in that speech, the ones that had been written by his staff and when he read from the teleprompter, which spoke about the aspirations and the vision of a more integrated region and the opportunity of expanded normalization between Israel and many other countries, and the way that could even help benefit Palestinians. Then along the way, he had all sorts of ad-libs and asides, including a lot of his greatest hits where he likes to bash his predecessors. Unnecessary, it's kind of unseemly and unpresidential, if you ask me, particularly on such a historic day. In fact, one of the strengths of the U.S.-Israel relationship is its bipartisanship, so that regardless of which party holds the White House or the Congress, fundamental aspects of this very important security partnership we have with Israel are maintained. There's pressure on that within the U.S. public, as there are in some other Western countries as well. But it doesn't help matters if you actually care about the relationship and not just some partisan advantage for a president to go to Israel and criticize it so publicly his predecessors from another party.
A day of hope followed by a lot of very, very hard days and months and weeks of work ahead. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. And I'd really like your thoughts on this day of hope. Can you see the peace deal holding? And love him or loathe him, how much praise should Trump be getting? Text me on 84850 or email mar@lbc.co.uk. Coming up, halfway through his address to the Knesset, 2 protesters interrupted President Trump's speech and were quickly escorted out. One of them will be with me next, but the time now, 6:19.
This is LBC.
Sharing intimate photos of her without her consent.
Unwanted touching, unwanted comments, unwanted nudes.
controlling what she can and can't wear.
Controlling who she can and can't see.
Threatening her.
Enough. This is abuse.
If you think it's wrong, act on it.
Call it out, show support, report it.
There are many ways you can safely tackle violence against women and girls. Find out how at gov.uk/enough. If someone is in danger, call 999.
At Amazon, over 50% of deliveries now come with less packaging or with no added packaging at all. It's a difference you'll notice on your doorstep, where you chat with friends, where your neighbour's daughter practices guitar, and where we deliver your new noise-cancelling headphones in the manufacturer's packaging. Ah, much better. Reduced packaging from Amazon. We're delivering change where it matters, on your doorstep. Based on 2024 UK and EU Amazon packaging data.
I'm telling you, raise taxes, that's how.
Cut spending, less waste, more sense.
Move north, get more for your money.
Until winter hits your heating bill.
Fair.
Up to 9.13% annual return. We all agree that's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to ignore.
Cufflink. Auto invest property backed from £500. Visit cufflink.com. That's KUFLINK. Register your interest today. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to IF ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:20. I think it's really important to remember that not every voice in Israel applauds Donald Trump for what he's done. 2 Israeli MPs disrupted his speech in the Knesset, holding up signs that read, "Recognise Palestine." Have a listen.
I've known him for many years, and I've seen it over and over again.
להוציא את חבר הכנסת עודה, להוציא אותו מהאולם, להוציא אותו מיד, החוצה, החוצה.
Please expel this Knesset member. Please expel this Knesset member.
להוציא גם את חבר הכנסת כסיף. להוציא את חבר הכנסת כסיף מהאולם.
Knesset member Cassif out of the hall. Please expel him immediately.
Now, one of the protesters, Ofer Cassif, who's part of a coalition of left-wing parties in the Knesset, joins me now. Ofer, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight. Now, your protest was simple in terms of language, recognise Palestine. Just tell people listening why you thought it was important to disrupt President Trump's speech to make that point.
I don't think, first of all, that we disrupted because we didn't shout, we didn't curse, we didn't even speak. We just, held those signs. Obviously, we put some of the blame, a great deal of the blame for the genocide and the sacrifice of the Israeli hostages on Trump himself and his administration. Because let's not forget that he supported the government of Israel in last March, when the government of Israel itself was the one that violated the previous agreement with Hamas. He allowed the continuation of the genocide in Gaza, as well as the sacrifice of the Israeli soldiers and hostages. So there's something really twisted in referring now to Trump as a savior when he was really a complicit, a total complicit in those atrocities, including the sacrifice of the hostages. And we have to say something about it. And, there was today a show in the Knesset that was so grotesque, a total, cult of personality. This is unbelievable. This is unacceptable of Trump and of Netanyahu. For what? For the crimes they committed?
And they were certainly praising each other lavishly, and Trump said, Netanyahu should be forgiven his crimes and so on. But looking further forward, is your concern that this entire peace deal, this entire situation is going to be overturned because Israel will not accept a two-state solution, will not recognise Palestine, and that therefore things will fall apart? Is that your fundamental concern?
Absolutely, but I do not trust that even Trump actually is interested in that. We just have to look at what he's been saying and doing since he got to office. So it's very strange for me, to see so many people, including leaders, who are not naive, who still believe this megalomaniac in what he says. We must be very cautious. And I would like to say another thing. Trump we should not thank him. There's no gratitude to Trump, exactly the opposite. If we have to say thank you to someone, and we do, it's to the masses of people across the world, to the millions of people in different countries, in England, in the United States itself, in Spain, in Italy, in Holland, and in many other places. They took to the streets to protest against the carnage that was going on in Gaza, calling for justice and peace. We have to thank them. You know, the other day, just a couple of days ago, Trump said to Netanyahu, and I quote, "Israel cannot be against the whole world." That shows that if something
those protests had an effect.
Trump's attitude is the protest across the world. Continue with that.
That's really, really interesting. And we also heard Donald Trump praise Netanyahu as a great war leader. Now, you've used the word genocide. So how did you feel about those words?
There was no war there. First of all, I have to say two things, with your permission. We were against the carnage that Hamas committed on October 7th from the very beginning. This was absolutely a terrible and criminal carnage and massacre that no one could and should tolerate or accept. We were Palestinians and Jews together in my party. We were absolutely with no reservations against it. But at the same time, we were against the continuation of the continuous genocide in Gaza. And those two perceptions of ours is exactly based on our humanistic way of thinking and ideology. And we should cling to that, and we will cling to that. That's our gist, as say Democrats, socialists, etc.
You say humanistic. Is religion the real problem here?
Absolutely not. The real problem here has always been a problem of discrimination, a problem of exclusion, marginalization, and basically occupation and dispossession. Colonization, if you like. That's the main issue. If we take colonization from the equation by not only recognizing, but by establishing a full sovereign and independent Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel, not instead. In the territories, all the territories that Israel occupied in June 1967, that is to say West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip, that's the only formula to solve and stop the bloodshed. No other way. In that sense, our opinion, our beliefs and our stance is not against Israel. They always try to present us as if we are anti-Israel. We are not anti-Israel. For the benefit of both peoples, Palestinians and Israelis, there's a need to reach peace. And that requires justice, and justice requires ending the occupation. As simple as that. So we are joyful about the end of the genocide and the release of the hostages, absolutely. But we cannot stop there. We must.
Thank you very much. On a day dominated by Donald Trump, I think it was very, very important to hear that argument. Ofer, Cassif, thank you very much indeed for talking to me tonight. So much has been happening on this huge day for the Middle East, it's hard to keep up. Donald Trump spoke again just as we were coming on air, and here is a little of what he said.
This is the day that people across the region and around the world have been working, striving, hoping, and praying for. They have done things over the last month that I think were really unthinkable. Nobody thought this could happen. With the historic agreement we've just signed, those prayers of millions have finally been answered. As you know, the hostages have been returned. And further work goes on having to do with the, sadly to say, bodies. Together we've achieved what everybody said was impossible. At long last, we have peace in the Middle East. And it's a very simple expression, peace in the Middle East. And we've heard it for many years, but nobody thought it could ever get there. And now we're there. And I want to congratulate everybody.
Full of his usual self-deprecation. But what were the other themes in Donald Trump's big speeches today? And what is really going on at that peace summit in Egypt? And what can we expect next? Big questions. But luckily, LBC's Washington correspondent Simon Marks has been across it all and is with me in the studio now. Simon, just listening to Ofer there, very, very strong theme in Trump's speech to the Knesset was, you have won a war, you're the victors. Netanyahu's a great war leader. It wasn't exactly a balanced speech, was it?
Well, but I do think that there were points in the speech, Andrew, where he was actually revealing carefully the extent to which he had to really push Benjamin Netanyahu to accept that now was the time to make peace. I mean, he said
he's a tough guy. He's a very hard guy. You can be nicer now, Bibi.
And there was you can be nice now. And there was a section of the speech where he said, I explained to you. I mean, he was addressing Netanyahu directly that it was no longer a time to continue engaging in kill, kill, kill.
Yeah.
And of course, that all arose as a direct result of the Israeli Prime Minister's decision to authorize the airstrike on Hamas negotiators in Qatar, which created the opening, a US ally, of course, that Donald Trump craved in order to try and move this to the peace that he coveted. And I do think this is a confounding day for Democrats. Donald Trump succeeded the most foreign policy experienced president of the modern era, Joe Biden, flanked by elites from the foreign policy
all the
glitterati,
guys,
Anthony Blinken,
guys.
Jake Sullivan. Yeah. And he's brought to the table his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, a special envoy, a real estate magnate who has conceded that he has learnt what he knows about foreign policy by watching Netflix documentaries. And these are the guys, whatever you think of the first 9 months of Trump's presidency, when they were absolutely facilitating the ongoing military actions by Israel in Gaza, these are the guys that have brought this to the deal that exists tonight.
And now at this Egypt conference, they're trying to reach out further and further. Donald Trump even reaching out to Iran at one point in the speech. How far do you think this can go? He's clearly got a vision of a network of countries who used to be hostile, all trading and working together in the future.
Yes, I think the most important line in the speech was where he was imagining a reality where the Abraham Accords that normalize ties with Israel by the signatories are joined not only by Saudi Arabia and Syria, but may eventually be signed by Indonesia, by India, by Pakistan, by Turkey. He sees this normalization of ties and trade-led new relationships with Israel as being the goal that he's now battling to achieve. Now, in Sharm el-Sheikh tonight, they have signed a document, all the leaders that are there, including the Prime Minister. We have no idea what that document says. Its text has not been released. The President says it's very important. It sets up rules of the road going ahead. We know that in his speech today, President Trump indicated that Arab states, he said he'd put together this coalition of the wealthiest countries around. They're the ones that are going to rebuild Gaza and develop it. But the text of that is going to be critical to study.
Well, Simon, it's lucky that some programmes are on air again tomorrow, I guess. Thank you very much indeed for that, Simon Marks. Now then, the government's been facing criticism over the abandoned Chinese spy case, with MPs putting them on the spot in the Commons this afternoon. We're going to get all the latest on that in just a few minutes. But first, the time now, 6:32, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
A member of the Knesset who was escorted out of Donald Trump's speech has told LBC it's twisted to refer to the US president as a saviour. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Ofer Cassif says he is complicit in some of the atrocities committed in Gaza. The government says MI5 will now take steps to protect Parliament from spying. It follows the collapse of a Chinese espionage trial, with Downing Street strongly rejecting claims it had a hand in the case, not making it to court. And Vodafone is trying to fix an issue with its network, which is affecting all of its broadband, 4G and 5G services. Thousands of customers have reported outages this afternoon. LBC weather, some clear spells in the north and far west tonight, staying largely cloudy for the south and far north, a low of 3 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
The joy of the families in Israel, the victory lap for Donald Trump. But is it coming just a touch too soon? One step has been taken. There are many more still to come.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlius, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
I'm telling you, raise taxes, that's how.
Cut spending, less waste, more sense.
Move north, get more for your money.
Until winter hits your heating bill.
Fair.
Up to 9.13% annual return. We all agree that's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to ignore.
Cufflink. Auto invest property backed from £500. Visit cufflink.com. That's Kuflink. Register your interest today. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to if ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
This year, Amazon are increasing the electric delivery vehicles we use across Europe to 10,000. It's a difference you'll notice on your doorstep, where babies are made a fuss of, where we deliver footballs for kids' kickabouts, and where they deliver the football straight into next door's garden. Can I have their ball back, please? We're delivering change where it matters, on your doorstep. Delivery service partner vehicles across the UK and EU.
The Monopoly game at McDonald's is back. And with a 1 in 4 chance to win instantly on pack, you could get your hands on a £2,000 Jet2 holiday, a Big Mac, Merlin annual passes for 4, and even more epic prizes. Go on, it's your go. 18 plus, UK, ends 21st of October. Selected menu items, subject to availability. App may be required. See mcdrules.co.uk.
When you're smiling. Banning Dental Group clinics. With over 5,000 top-rated Google reviews. Keep on smiling.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
It is 6:35. One of the key figures in the British end of the negotiations over the Middle East has been the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, the same man who was Chief of Staff to Tony Blair throughout his time as Prime Minister. But Powell has been under sustained pressure over his role in the Chagos Islands deal and China. He's accused of being part of the collapse of the Chinese spy trial, something that he and the government fiercely deny. Anyway, all of this spilled over into the Commons this afternoon. Let's start by eavesdropping ourselves. First on the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, defending the government, and then the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, not defending the government.
It was evident that the Official Secrets Act was no longer fit for purpose as early as 2015, when Conservative ministers tasked the Law Commission with reviewing this antiquated legislation 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker. In 2020, the Law Commission and the Intelligence and Security Committee of this House were both clear that this legislation, drafted before the First World War, needed to be updated as a matter of urgency. All of the evidence provided by the Deputy National Security Advisor was based on the law at the time of the offence.
The 2021 integrated review described China as, listen carefully, the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. The 2023 integrated review refresh said China posed, let's listen carefully, a threat several times. In 2024, the then Minister for Security said from that dispatch box that China poses a serious threat. But even if the last government had not said China was a threat, and it did, the government only needed to convince a jury that it was a threat, and he knows that. I am astonished that the minister has repeated this nonsense today.
The fundamental question here, I guess, Natasha Clark, is that China is a bigger and bigger part of all of our lives. It sort of hangs over our economy. It's increasingly a security threat. They are behind Putin's war, helping Putin in his war in Ukraine, and we don't quite know how to deal with them.
I think that's fair, Andrew. So this whole case basically figures around one question. Did the government deliberately scupper this trial in a bid to try to keep China on side? We know that Sir Keir Starmer and lots of his top ministers have really focused on their relationship with China this year. We've seen Ed Miliband, Rachel Reeves. We were going to see the Prime Minister fly over to China. They believe that it's helpful with economic growth and it is a good thing to have a good relationship with them. But this trial of those two men accused of spying for China, that has now collapsed.
That's collapsed because the government wouldn't say China's a national security threat.
That's according to the Crown Prosecution Service, who came out last week with pretty much an extraordinary intervention. So this is the first time we've been hearing from the government on this. You heard just now from Dan Jarvis. The crucial thing, I think, from that evidence that we just heard in Parliament is he says that essentially the Deputy National Security Advisor, Matthew Collins, has given evidence to this trial. The question now is, what has changed? Will we see that evidence? Why has that evidence that he did give given the Crown Prosecution Service reason to say, we don't think this case has a leg to stand on anymore? The Conservatives are saying this is all part of a big cover-up.
And at the centre of the person they're really going for, the big guy in the centre of this, is Jonathan Powell, who's very, very heavily involved in what's happening today in the Middle East, but also a very, very big figure inside the government, advising the Prime Minister directly.
For sure.
There has been really, really vicious briefing against Jonathan Powell in the Sunday papers, and it looks to me as if somebody deep inside the government has got it in for them. Perhaps there's old scores being paid off. Who knows?
Definitely. And actually today we did have a bit more information about that meeting that Jonathan Powell was involved in. Number 10 admitting for the first time he was there at a meeting in September where they did discuss this case with the CPS and other senior security sources. So they say this concerned Britain's bilateral relationship with China on matters of national security. So he was there, he was involved. They are saying he wasn't involved in withdrawing or withholding evidence, but he was involved at the very, very heart of this case.
But in a way, it'd be very, very weird if he wasn't involved and if they weren't having meetings about the effect of this case on the relations with China, given how important it is. So that doesn't seem to me to be lethal. But I'm just really interested. Lots of people around Keir Starmer have been falling away in recent days and weeks. It's almost as if people are kind of knocking out the pins or the stakes holding Keir Starmer up one by one by one.
It's clear that he is definitely now the target of some really succinct and targeted briefing from people within government. You saw that senior cabinet minister in the Times yesterday basically saying, I think he's basically becoming a distraction for the government. There are questions about whether at some point there will be some sort of damning evidence revealed about him. But like I say, I think this all does now reign on what that evidence was that was handed over to the CPS and whether there is any proof that Jonathan Powell was or was not involved, and actually that handing over of what evidence could be used from the government. At the moment, we don't know. Like I say, the Tories are asking lots of questions, but someone's clearly got it out for Jonathan Powell, don't they?
It's one of those stories which seemed like a tiny little cloud on the horizon not long ago, which is becoming a huge thunderstorm hanging over the government. Really, really interesting, Natasha. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, there is another domestic story and an exclusive coming about the Conservative Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. And I'm joined for that by LBC's political correspondent, Aggie. Robert Jenrick, the star of TikTok, star of Instagram, star of X, the guy who really understands social media.
Some would say the star of the Conservative Party too, Andrew. This indeed is a story about him. So he went to court last week, Southwark Crown Court, to support a man who has claimed that 99% of rapists were Muslim. So this is about a man called Hamit Kuskan. He's 51. He had been convicted under a public order offence after burning a Quran outside the Turkish consulate. And he won his appeal at Southwark Crown Court last week. And who was there but one? Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick. Now, I'm told he wasn't listening inside the court, but had he been listening inside the court, then he would have heard the judgment read by Justice Benathan, and he was talking about Mr. Kuskan's police interview, where he claimed some pretty, unsavoury things, that 99% of rapists were Muslims. Justice Benathan said he believes Islam is an ideology which encourages its followers to violence, paedophilia, and a disregard for the rights of non-believers. Also talking about the ideology of Islam corrupting other properties or anything they own and using their children as slaves. Now, the judge did also say that Kuskan had repeatedly said his argument is with the institution of Islam, not individual Muslims. And he also wanted to be conscious that his English is limited. But he did find that the defendant has, and these are his words, the justice's words, a deep-seated hatred of Islam and its followers. As I say, Robert Jenrick's team insist he wasn't in the court when that was read out, and a spokesman for Robert Jenrick said he's always been clear he doesn't agree with what Kuskan did. This was an issue of principle. We do not have and should not have a blasphemy law in this country. Protecting free expression will often mean protecting speech that we don't agree with. Indeed, we aren't willing to do that. We don't really believe in free expression.
Well, this is a really, really interesting case because on the one hand, we are free to attack religions all we want. You can attack any religion and you can say more or less whatever you like about it, short of actually encouraging people to take violent action against members of that religion. So, I can see all of that. And yet some of the things this guy is saying are so extreme that if you are a very senior politician of any party, you would not want to be standing shoulder to shoulder with him.
And they were standing basically literally shoulder to shoulder in that post that Robert Jenrick put up on social media, where he tweeted on the day, "I'm at Southwark Crown Court to support Hamit Kuskan." And there was a picture of them standing together. And Andrew,
it's an endorsement.
It's an endorsement. And he does say he doesn't agree with what he says. But if he didn't know what he'd said, wouldn't you want to find find out what he said before you had that photograph taken, before you said literally that you supported him? And if he didn't know what he said, well, then why not?
I think the other really interesting aspect of this, Aggie, is, as I said earlier on, Robert Jenrick has been a past master at using social media to distinguish himself, not just from Labour politicians, but from other Conservative politicians. He's the guy leaping over barriers in the London Underground. He's the guy seen talking to this person or that person. He was, of course, the guy in Handsworth who found he couldn't find any other white faces. And there comes a point when you perhaps cross a line by becoming so close to somebody whose views are so extreme, you are very, very embarrassed by what's happened. Is that the case here?
It doesn't seem to be. I think it seems to be that Robert Jenrick's team are pretty relaxed about this from what they seem to have said, and basically just pointed to the fact that they don't agree with what he said and talks about free speech. And this is an issue of principle, they say. But there are lots of people I have spoken to in the Conservative Party who do think this is pretty worrying and not delighted that Robert Jenrick was standing almost shoulder to shoulder with this man with such, as you put it, extreme views. Really, really interesting story. I think many of us are struggling to find the distinctions between free speech and incitement and all of that. But a fascinating story tells us a lot about the world that we're living in right now. Thank you, Aggie. Now, in a few moments, the man who served as the US Special Envoy to Northern Ireland will be with me to talk about what today's politicians can learn from the 1998 Good Friday Peace Agreement. The time now, 6:45.
Coming up at 7, Ian Dale leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC.
Get your own UK-based account manager, a beekeeper, for support with Pension Bee. Because when your pension is in a good place, you're in a good place. When investing, your capital is at risk.
Are you an absolutely huge fonter or a zoom-inner? Perhaps you're an arm stretched out like a zombie when holding a newspaper. Or a squint so tightly at the menu the waiter thinks you're sleeping. At Specsavers, we get it. You don't want to admit it's time to become a glasses wearer. That's okay. We're ready to see you whenever you're ready to see properly. Book an eye test at specsavers.co.uk so you can see clearer. Okay, we'll stop with the ers now.
There's some naughty folks out there in cyberspace, and it can be tough to tell a legit deal from a dodgy one. That's why you need Bitdefender, your very own digital heavyweight, working silently behind the scenes to keep you and your devices safe, whatever threats the web throws at you. Trusted by the experts, used by the pros.
Bitdefender, a global leader in cybersecurity. Trusted, always.
Verify now at bitdefender.com.
A Southern train is a place where you can just switch off. Where you have the chance to scroll your feeds as you roll past fields, or simply relax with a podcast, playlist, or power nap. Go with your flow and save with advanced tickets at southernrailway.com. Terms apply.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:47. Earlier on, I was asking for some messages, some interesting messages, I hoped, about today's events, and you do not fail me, folks. Here's one from an anonymous listener. He says, the thing about Donald Trump is that serious people like Netanyahu, Starmer, Mark Rutte, Putin, etc., don't really respect him. They either tolerate or manipulate or ingratiate themselves with him as a means to an end. But they know better than to actually buy into the hype. Deep down, they know it's all a show with Trump. Anthony in Scunthorpe says, hi, Andrew, all of you Trump haters, just remember, you don't have to like Trump to give him some credit. And Rich in Southampton says by WhatsApp, hi there, Andrew. Trump has predictably used this whole thing as an opportunity to brag and massage his own ego and slag off Biden and Obama. I am pessimistic about the outcome of all of this. Well, thank you for these and many, many more messages. Earlier on, we were talking about Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, and one of those back in the day who was responsible for the Good Friday Peace Agreement in Northern Ireland. Many of the issues back then, the groups of paramilitaries, very resistant to giving up. The problem of decommissioning arms, the need for economic help are echoed even more loudly in Gaza. So is it possible to read across from the deals done in Belfast to what's happening in the Middle East? I'm joined now by Dr. Richard Haass, the US Special Envoy in Northern Ireland in the early 2000s. Dr. Haass, thank you very much for joining us. Very straightforward question, I guess. Are there things that you learned in Northern Ireland that could be useful in the Middle East now?
In a word, yes. Two things in particular. One is the security situation needs to be just that, secure. When the British got involved in Northern Ireland, I know aspects of it were and are controversial, but between the police, the military, and so forth, it became clear to the paramilitaries they were not going to shoot their way towards their political goals. And the same thing has to be true here when it comes to groups like Hamas. There has to be, if there is some type of an Arab or international stabilization force, it has to be capable. It has to be more than a peacekeeping force. It has to assume there's going to be resistance and has to be prepared to deal with it. Secondly, the other great insight of Northern Ireland, and Jonathan Powell and Tony Blair and others deserve a lot of credit here, is you've got to have more than a military strategy. You've got to have also a political strategy. You essentially have to tell people you're not going to get what you want by shooting and killing, but you could get a lot of what you want through diplomacy, through politics, through compromise. And that is yet to be opened here. This plan is very vague on that. And that will really, I think, be a question for the United States, probably working with the next Israeli government following Israeli elections. Can we get Israel to be more forthcoming, more open to compromise? And can you get a Palestinian partner other than Hamas that's willing to coexist peacefully with Israel? Those are the big issues. But I think there, again, Northern Ireland has more than a little bit to teach us.
There's no point in talking to people you already agree with. But on your first point about the paramilitaries, that you're suggesting that actually some kind of force needs to go deeply into Gaza, deeply into all of Gaza, and be ready virtually on every crossing point, watching around wherever Hamas might appear, because Hamas are already out there with their weapons, which doesn't look very hopeful.
No, you can't stop every incident. And you're never going to know where all the weapons are, even with decommissioning. Even to this day, we don't know whether what percentage of weapons were handed over, where weapons might be stashed away somewhere. But there has to be a strong enough force to discourage Hamas, its soldiers, from challenging order or to deal with it if and when they do. Again, you can't prevent everything. You can't be on every street corner, but you can have a visible, capable presence, and you can respond quite strongly if and when force is used by Hamas or some other group. You could face a situation, by the way, where there's multiple groups that, for whatever reason, want to undermine order.
A really important point. Dr. Haass, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, a completely different but very significant political story. Now, the Scottish National Party conference, which ended in Aberdeen earlier on, voted overwhelmingly for an independent strategy laid out by its leader, John Swinney. He says that winning a majority, that's 65 seats, in next year's Scottish parliamentary elections would be, and I quote, the only uncontested way to deliver a new vote on Scotland's future. I'm joined now by Stephen Gethins, the SNP MP and party's international affairs spokesman in the Commons. Stephen, thanks for coming on to the show. Great to have you on. Can you explain to people listening how this would actually work? Let's assume the SNP wins 65 seats in next year's elections. What happens then? Because this entirely depends upon the government deciding to give the SNP, the Scottish government, an independence referendum. And I just put it to you, there is absolutely no chance of them doing that.
Well, the precedent is that if the SNP win a majority, that there will be an independence referendum. So the First Minister has set, if I may, Andrew, the First Minister set out his plan, endorsed by the party. If the party is wrong, and if we're in a voluntary union, and you've been a great historian of the United Kingdom, and Andrew, I've read your fine work on it, what is the alternative? If this is a voluntary union, there must be an exit clause. So this is our exit clause. This is our way of triggering a referendum. Now the government have the responsibility to tell us if they agree with it, and if not, what is it?
I think that is theoretically beautiful, but I don't think it's going to happen in reality. I mean, I just see absolutely no way in which Keir Starmer is going to say, I know what, let's have a referendum on the future of the UK.
Well, it may be theoretically beautiful, but there is a political reality here, which is that people in Scotland believe that we're part of a voluntary union. If we're not part of a voluntary union, as you know, better than most, that profoundly changes the nature of the United Kingdom of which we are a part. Now, there is already a mechanism by which one part of the United Kingdom can leave, and whereby we have a political generation in Northern Ireland. Yeah. So there must be a way for Scotland to do so. So the First Minister set out his plan. It's one with precedent, and in England we have common law, of course, and that relies on precedent. And the precedent is that that leads to an independence referendum. And if I'm wrong, then the Prime Minister should set out what is the mechanism by which Scotland can leave the United Kingdom.
He might say, wait for a generation from the last one.
But we've gone through a generation. There are a million Scots who can now vote who did not have the benefit of voting. Within this next Parliament, there will be Scots who were not even born who will gain the vote. Now, we already have a political generation set out elsewhere, which is 7 years. So we've gone through that.
A political generation is only 7 years. All right.
No, but that's
news to me. Okay.
That's not mine. It's not news to you. You know that's in the agreement you've just been discussing with Dr. Haass a short time ago. There is that precedent as well. I'm not saying it should be 7 years, but that's the one which is written down, which shouldn't have come as news to you, because I know you're a good student of Northern Ireland.
Now you're buttering me up, Stephen. What happens if you don't get 65 seats? Does that mean it's over?
Well,
by the same logic?
Look, just in the same way that every year we had Brexiteers campaigning to leave the European Union. I'm somebody who believes in independence. About half of the population of Scotland agree with me. That number, I suspect, would go up during a campaign with an independence referendum, as it did last time. So I'm somebody who will campaign for what I believe in, because believe it or not, there are still parties who campaign for what they believe in, Andrew.
Very well said. You're also, as I said, the international affairs spokesman. Do you think this is a moment for genuine hope in the Middle East, or is your scepticism overwhelming about what Donald Trump's doing?
Look, anything that stops a killing has to be a good thing. Now, but what we've seen in peace processes in places like Bosnia and Herzegovina, Northern Ireland and elsewhere is that a peace process does not begin and end because of one agreement, because of one ceasefire. It takes a long time, and it's a work in progress still in Northern Ireland and in Bosnia and elsewhere 30 years on. This is a long-term project, so we need to be realistic.
All that to be true. Stephen Gethins, thank you very much for coming in. Now, as we've heard throughout the show, it's been a day dominated by the Middle East and, up to a point, by our relations with China. There is therefore no better guest I could finish with for an overview than the former Foreign Affairs Select Committee Chair and Shadow Minister for National Security and Safeguarding, Alicia Kearns. And she's on the line now. Good evening, Alicia.
Hi, Andrew.
Can I start by asking, since you've been in the chamber listening to the debate on the Chinese spy trial and all of that, one of the people there worked for you for a while. Do you think that they were handing over to the Chinese genuinely dangerous information?
So, Andrew, I don't know the full extent of what those individuals shared because, unfortunately, as a witness, obviously, the police wanted to make sure they didn't taint my evidence. But when you're questioned, you end up getting quite a lot of information about what was revealed. And there was lots of information about initiatives we were working on. So, for example, we were the ones that stopped a semiconductor factory from being bought fully by the Chinese government, essentially. We were the ones that got lots of changes to legislation around the procurement bill, TikTok, things on phones changed. But also, the main thing often when it comes to espionage is countries trying to understand how to influence and undermine our state. And that colour, that state of mind, that information is fundamental to what, particularly the Chinese Communist Party, who does not understand how our parliament works, is trying to get their hands on.
Very, very interesting. Alicia, there's been a great debate about whether the government did or did not try to collapse this spy trial and whether Jonathan Powell is at the heart of that. Those of us on the outside find it very hard, I think, to work out quite the truth of that. What's your view, having heard what you've heard in the Commons today?
So I'm afraid today in the Commons, the government did itself no favours. All I know is that the heads of the security agencies told us this was a slam dunk trial. I have the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, telling me that they were right to bring forward charges and that the evidential basis was met before the general election. I also have the CPS telling me that I was targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. But now we have the government making party political points that are not true. I mean, the very day that these two men were arrested, the government published the Integrated Review Refresh, which said that the Chinese Communist Party is a threat to our people and to our security. But that's all a red herring. The judge for the Russian-Bulgarian spy case actually said it is for jury, not for the government to prove, it is for a jury to decide whether or not China or any other state may be a threat at some point or now to our country. And I'm afraid if the government was as disappointed as they say they are about the case, then why have they taken no steps to punish the Chinese Communist Party? Why have there been no repercussions? Because that is something they could do if they were truly disappointed that the trial had collapsed.
So what about the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell? There's been a lot of briefing against him, but from what you've heard, should he now resign?
At this point, all I have is significant concerns and questions about the actions he has taken, which also it looks like took place during the few days of the Labour government reshuffle. I want those answered, and on the basis of those, I will make a decision as to whether he has to resign or not. But at this point, the government has not once reached out to either Tom Tugendhat, the other MP involved, or myself and offered us any sort of briefing or any sort of explanation. And that wall of silence starts with suggesting ineptitude, but quickly turns to conspiracy.
Well, they may be listening to this interview and thinking, ooh, we've made a mistake there. Alicia, Kearns, thank you very much for talking to me. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion, put your news categories in the order you'd like them, pause, rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. So download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kendish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Only one subject in town today, and that, of course, is the centenary of Margaret Thatcher's birth. Just my little joke.
Together we've achieved
For the first time since the 7th of October 2023, there is some hope that a renewed Middle East peace process could soon be launched, which would presumably have to result in a new independent Palestinian state. Donald Trump has been speaking in the Knesset and later in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. But how likely is Donald Trump to bring real peace to the region? On Cross Question 8, Tory Shadow Cabinet Minister Andrew Bowie, Tom Hayes, Labour MP for Bournemouth East, journalist Rebecca Reid, and LBC political editor Natasha Clark.